Students, have you ever lost your temper with a teacher? Story 1. Junior year of high school, I had an English teacher who had a reputation for being a total. Toward the end of the semester, my mom unexpectedly passed away. I spent 3 nights in the hospital with her before she died. The day before she passed, I was in class when our teacher starts asking questions about the previous night's reading assignment. I obviously had not done the reading due to spending the previous 2 nights in the ER. So she calls on me, and I clearly did not know the answer. Looks like somebody didn't do their reading last night. Why didn't you do your homework? At this point, I'm trying my absolute hardest to hold it together and not start bawling in front of my friends and classmates. She mistook this for me being embarrassed that I didn't do my homework. She then puts both hands on my desk and sarcastically said, "Oh, what's wrong? Do you need a hug?" I finally lost it. I stood up and fighting through tears, I said, "I didn't do it because I was in the hospital with my dying mother. Go f*** yourself, you stupid." I then walked out and never went back to her class. Story 2. I had a Spanish teacher, and in order to gain other students' sympathy, she would make fun of one of the students and kind of bully, not super badly, that student for this hour of class. Of course, other students would sometimes laugh because class was super boring, so it was like a show. I hated that. Of course, she would pick the students that didn't reply back to her provocation, the low-profile type, and of course she would use the perfect excuse just after being mean. Oh, it was just a joke. Once that guy that never starts trouble with anyone was her victim of the day. She takes him as an example to describe a homeless guy on a picture. After only 10 long minutes, he stands up and leaves the classroom crying. And when she stops him before he leaves, he tells her his dad died the previous night and pushes her away. Once the door closed behind him, she pauses for a second and took on a crying voice to repeat what he had just said. "My dad just died. Oh, poor baby." Before I realized it, she received my Spanish book in the face, and I called her an ugly. Yeah, it's completely unacceptable for a teacher to use a student as a means of gaining sympathy from their peers, especially in such a cruel and insensitive manner. The fact that the student's father had just passed away and she still chose to mock him is truly disgusting. I'm glad to see that at least one student had the courage to stand up against this kind of behavior, and I hope that this teacher is held accountable for her actions. Story 3. My grandpa had just died, like 2 days before. I pretty much grew up with my grandparents because of family drama and stuff. So my mother goes to my school, asks my teachers to go easy on me for a couple of weeks. The same day, I kid you not, surprise oral test. I don't answer anything. I don't even want to. A month passes by. This teacher is commenting on our performances. He tells me I've had a good performance throughout the year, except a small hiccup a couple of weeks before. She then proceeds to ask me, "What happened? Your dog got sick? Your little boyfriend dumped you?" With that sort of mocking tone. My classmates had to physically stop me from throwing something at her. Never been so angry in my life, and I was a very calm, shy kind of dude, straight A+ student. Story 4. When I was in kindergarten, my first teacher got pregnant and had to take maternity leave. She was replaced with a substitute teacher who taught my class for the rest of the school year. This substitute teacher was very strict and not very nice. I had issues with her, but I was a very good student, quiet and to myself. One day I asked to go use the bathroom, but she refused. I really had to go and ended up peeing on myself. I remember going to the nurse and then they called my mom. My mom went up to the school and had a meeting with the teacher, the principal, and someone else. 2 days later, that teacher was fired. This is a really disappointing story, and it's hard to believe that a teacher would be so cruel and neglectful of a young child's basic needs. It's clear that this substitute teacher was not fit to be working with children, but it's fortunate that action was taken to remove her from the classroom. Story 5. Not a teacher, but one of the school admins. I did a year at a small Christian college. One of the girls on campus witnessed her father's. She had no idea what was happening. She'd just come home one day and her dad was standing in the backyard with a gun to his head, and he said, "I love you, baby," and shot himself. Needless to say, she was traumatized. so she went and talked to the campus counselor. She had fallen into a state of shock and depression, and she was seeking help. The campus counselor broke patient-doctor confidentiality, went to the dean of the campus, and blabbed the whole thing to him. The dean then called her into his office and said, "This is a Christian school, and depression is a sin. You're expelled." So on top of losing her dad, she lost her housing, dorm room, all her friends on campus that were there to support her, and a good chunk of her progress on her degree. She was wrapping up her 3rd year. Story 6. Okay, maybe not the worst teacher, but definitely the strangest. Mr. Pratt. He was a substitute teacher I had in high school in the 90s, inner city school. He was an older black dude with a loud mouth. There were a lot of butthole students, though, who always mouthed back to every teacher, which made learning difficult. Mr. Pratt had an odd choice when responding to these kids. Imagine a well-dressed but definitely ghetto-sounding substitute who, when a student tried to act out, would pull a puppet, obviously custom-made and looked just like him, suit and all, out of his desk. He would then start berating the student via the puppet. The puppet was called Pratt Daddy, by the way. He would make the student talk to the puppet and apologize. Most didn't. They were laughing too hard and tried to talk over Pratt Daddy, in which case Pratt Daddy, the puppet, would kick them out of the class and lock the door. Then the puppet went back into the desk drawer, and Mr. Pratt continued. It was odd. Not gonna lie, this sounds really hilarious, but at the same time, really, really weird. Story 7. A friend of mine wanted to go to a certain university that was out of state and somewhat tough to get into. The counselor told him to not waste his time as he would never get in. This pissed him off, so he went to the principal, who told him to trust the counselor as that was her job. He applied anyways, got accepted, and taped 2 copies to the counselor and principal's door. He couldn't afford to go anyways, but he was trying to prove a point. Story 8. Had an issue with a chemistry TA losing my lab reports or other homework. After he confronted me about another missing assignment in our chem lab, we had a fairly heated exchange and I stormed out of the lab. I made it about halfway across the large public campus before realizing I still had my lab goggles on. I can only imagine what people thought of some random guy walking around with lab goggles on. Story 9. As a mature, aged student taking on a 2nd degree, I ran into an external lecturer who treated my class like we were 15-year-old children. The youngest in my class was 20 at that time, but has more maturity than I tend to have. Whatever, the external lecturer is a pretty big name in the local industry, so I sucked it up as best as I could, no matter what condescending rule or lecture she threw at me. The first time I lost my cool was when I made a soft joke to my classmate, and she laid into my classmate for somehow inciting the joke, even though I had been fully responsible for the interaction. My classmate hadn't even responded to me. I tried to point this out, and the external lecturer brushed me off, saying, "It's done, we're moving on." The second time I lost my cool was a few days before our final. External lecturer had been making us practice drills a very specific way in our classroom and was very particular about the specificity. We then moved into the actual venue for final drills, and all of us were up one way or the other because we were all stressed out of our minds, trying to recalibrate to the new venue while the external lecturer berated us on every little thing we changed that was not to her liking. Finally, she stopped me in the middle of the drill and asked me very sarcastically why I chose to do what I did. And I answered, "That's how we had practiced it in the classroom, and I apologize that I cannot read your mind on how you would like to adjust it, but I am doing my best." Silence for an eternity. She moved on to berate another classmate for another adjustment, and then finally she came back to me. "Don't you dare say things like you can't read my mind. Just do your work and actually try." I stood up taller and said I was trying very hard. That's what we were all doing, and it was very difficult to adjust to the venue to her liking without some guideline. And would she like to provide us with one? She told me to get out. I burned that bridge real good. Story 10. In my freshman year of high school, a teacher wouldn't let me leave to the ER. While peeing in the bathroom, it started burning, and I saw that I was peeing out blood instead of regular urine. So I called my mom and told her what happened, and she told me that she'll come pick me up from school and take me to the hospital. After all that happened, I went back to class, and my teacher complained that I was late to class and told me to sit down. When my mom was waiting outside for me, I told the teacher I had to leave and that it was an emergency. The teacher told me to sit down as I was already late to his class and that I can't leave. I kept on insisting that I had to leave and there's a problem I have to deal with, but he wouldn't listen. So I got fed up with him and just walked straight out of class. He called out to me and asked me where I thought I was going and also asked if I wanted to continue learning in his class. I told him I'm going to the hospital and that everything I learned in his class was self-taught and that he was a useless teacher. When I reached the hospital, they kept me there for an entire week and ended up diagnosing me with kidney stones. They told me that I had to go through an operation to remove them as they were too large to remove through other means. This is another outrageous and unacceptable situation. The priority in this situation should have been the student's health and well-being, not the teacher's desire to maintain strict rules about attendance. It's completely unacceptable for a teacher to ignore students' pleas for medical attention, especially when it's clear that something serious is happening. The student was right to stand up for themselves and leave class to seek medical attention. Story 11. A couple of weeks into my senior year of high school, the president gave a speech about the importance of school or something. I don't know. I wasn't really paying attention. Anyway, all of the teachers in my school had to set up their projectors so we could watch it. My math teacher couldn't figure out how to get her projector working. So me, being the nerdy kid, I offered to help. She had a fit, started screaming about how she wasn't stupid and how I needed to just sit down and shut up. After a few more minutes of her failing to fix it, she pointed at me and ordered me to fix it. I said, "Fix it yourself." She told the whole class to go next door to watch the speech in that teacher's room. When we got up to leave, she pulled me to the side and told me that when the class got back, I was going to stand up and apologize for being so rude to her. I refused and went to join the rest of the class. She spent the rest of the year making my life miserable. She told me on several occasions that she was going to make sure that I failed her class. Sure enough, I failed her class. Only class I ever failed. Story 12. I never flipped out, but if I ever saw Mr. Lewis in public ever again, I'd punch him in the face. I was an immigrant child who spoke no English. He couldn't grasp why I couldn't understand him and yelled at me constantly for not following instructions for 2 months until someone told him that I didn't understand him. I developed a severe stuttering problem because of him that cost my parents thousands of dollars we didn't have in speech therapy. Story 13. My math teacher in high school believed that the only way that people could learn was to place a book in front of them and let them figure it out for themselves. He ignored our questions and our pleas for him to help us because we had to pass this math class to graduate. All he did was explain to us, "This is how other countries teach." Finally, one day I snapped in class and told him to get his lazy butt off his chair and teach us like a normal professor. It was so agitating because he never explained to us that this is how he taught. He was normal for the first day, and then on Monday when he started his method of teaching, it was too late to drop the class without penalties. What bothered me the most was this was a community college. Story 14. I once had a very terrible history teacher. This guy was something else. He was horrible to everyone and said some extremely questionable things. He never bothered me in particular too much. Few things here and there, but nothing super bad. Well, my best friend drowned while canoeing with some other students. A few days later, the principal had a moment of silence for him, and this teacher said, "Kid deserved it." And I lost my mind. I started yelling at him and I was crying and he was just standing there with this smirk on his face. My friends pulled me out of the room while he called the principal. I ended up suspended, but there was a walkout the next day due to my suspension. Geez, I can't even imagine how you must have felt hearing your best friend's death being trivialized like that, by your history teacher nonetheless. It's clear that this teacher had no empathy or compassion, and it's a shame that they were allowed to continue teaching in such a position of authority. Story 15. Hard-working student in my class, whose effort is seldom justified by the results he receives, gets a mediocre score for his English test. English teacher goes on to insult him in front of the whole class, saying that he was probably just going to end up working in law enforcement or in the army. Since she was standing near to me when she said that, I replied, being an English teacher doesn't necessarily mean that you're very successful in your life either. She goes on to shift the target to me instead, saying how she can't stand students like me. There were some verbal exchanges, and to end it off, we all had a graduation exam that we had to do, GCE Cambridge 0 levels. I ended up getting an A for English. I still went over to thank her on my results day, but she ignored me. Story 16. I saw it happen once and did it once. The time I saw it, it was in college algebra, a required course for every major. The professor teaching it treated everyone as if we should all be the quality of math majors. He'd ask people questions during class. If they didn't know, he'd ride them and embarrass them. One day, he even made a girl cry. A few weeks after doing this, he was doing the usual to a male student. Male student had had enough and began screaming at him and creating for him a new butthole. Several students chimed in, and it made the rest of the year rather awkward, but I'm glad they did it. The time I did it, I had a class where she gave random pop quizzes to enforce attendance. The quizzes counted for no points, but if you missed a certain percentage, you dropped a letter grade. At this point, I should have been getting an A+ due to extra credit. Instead, I had a C due to the attendance. One day, she canceled class. During the next class, she mentioned that while she could have easily made it in, she didn't feel like it because it was lightly snowing. I raised my hand and pointed out her hypocrisy. She didn't say much, but she did reverse the policy. Please leave your story down below in the comments. I would absolutely love to make a video about them in the future. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. And until next time, peace.